Sarah Martinez had been working at the military shooting range for 3 years when everything changed. Every morning at 5:30, she would arrive at Camp Pendleton's range facility before anyone else. The California sun hadn't even started to peek over the horizon, but Sarah was already checking targets, setting up lanes, and preparing ammunition for the day's training sessions. Most people saw her as just another range technician. She cleaned weapons, restocked ammunition, and helped Marines sight their rifles. It was honest work, but nothing special in the eyes of many. Sarah didn't mind the job, though she sometimes wondered if she was meant for something more. Her father had been a Marine, and her brother served in the Army. Military life was in her blood, but as a civilian contractor, she felt like she was always watching from the sidelines. Sarah had grown up around firearms. Her father taught her to shoot when she was 12 years old on their family ranch in Texas. By the time she was 16, she could outshoot most of the men in their small town. But life had taken her in different directions. College, a brief marriage that didn't work out, and eventually this job in California, where she could at least be around the military community she understood. On this particular Tuesday morning, Sarah was adjusting the scope on a sniper rifle when she noticed something wrong. The Marines who had been using this weapon the day before had left it with a crooked scope mount. Most range techs would have just reported it to the armorer, but Sarah had the skills to fix it herself. She carefully removed the scope, cleaned the mounting rail, and reinstalled it with precision that came from years of experience with firearms. As she worked, she didn't notice the tall figure watching her from the doorway. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb was a Navy SEAL who had been stationed at Pendleton for advanced training exercises. He had arrived early to inspect the weapons his team would be using for their long-range shooting drills. Instead, he found this small woman with steady hands making adjustments that most Marines couldn't do properly. Marcus watched Sarah work for several minutes. Her movements were confident and precise. She wasn't just tightening screws randomly. She understood the mechanics of the weapon system, the relationship between the scope and the barrel, and how even the smallest adjustment could affect accuracy at long distances. When she finished, she shouldered the rifle and peered through the scope, making micro-adjustments with the kind of patience that separates good shooters from great ones. "That's impressive work," Marcus said, stepping into the range. Sarah looked up, startled. She hadn't heard him approach. The first thing she noticed were his tattoos and the way he carried himself. This wasn't a regular Marine. His uniform bore the SEAL trident, and his presence filled the room with an intensity she had rarely encountered. "Just fixing a loose mount," Sarah replied, setting the rifle down carefully. "Some of the Marines yesterday were having trouble with their groups. Figured it might be the scope." Marcus picked up the weapon and examined her work. The scope was mounted perfectly with proper eye relief and alignment. More importantly, he could see that she had made adjustments based on understanding, not guesswork. "You have training as an armorer?" he asked. "No formal training," Sarah admitted. "Just grew up around guns. My dad taught me to work on them before I could drive." Marcus set the rifle down and looked at her more carefully. Sarah was maybe 5'4", with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her hands were small but strong, with calluses that came from real work, not just handling weapons occasionally. There was something in her eyes that reminded him of the best soldiers he had worked with, a combination of confidence and humility that couldn't be taught. "What's your name?" he asked. "Sarah Martinez. I'm one of the range techs here." "Marcus Webb. I'll be using this range with my team for the next 2 weeks. We're working on some specialized shooting scenarios." He paused, studying her reaction. "You ever do any competitive shooting?" Sarah hesitated. She had won several competitions back in Texas, but that felt like another lifetime. "Some. Nothing recent." Marcus had been in the military long enough to recognize talent when he saw it. He had also been around long enough to know that talent was often wasted because nobody took the time to recognize it. Something about Sarah reminded him of himself 20 years ago, when he was just another young sailor who might have been overlooked if the right person hadn't seen his potential. Over the next few days, Marcus observed Sarah more closely. He watched how she interacted with the Marines, always professional, but never intimidated. He noticed that she could spot problems with weapons that others missed. When Marines were struggling with their accuracy, Sarah often had suggestions that actually worked. She understood windage and elevation, bullet drop and barrel harmonics. Most importantly, she had the instincts of a natural shooter. On Thursday morning, Marcus arrived at the range to find Sarah already there, as usual. His team wouldn't arrive for another hour, which gave him an opportunity he had been thinking about. "Sarah," he called out as she finished setting up targets at the 200-yard line. "You got a few minutes?" She walked back to the firing line, curious about what the SEAL could want with her. "I've been watching you work this week," Marcus began. "You know more about weapons systems than half the Marines who come through here. And I'm willing to bet you can outshoot most of them, too." Sarah felt her face getting warm. "I just do my job." "I think you could do a lot more than your job," Marcus said. "My team is working on some challenging scenarios this week. Long-range precision work, the kind of shooting that requires real skill." He paused, letting that sink in. "I'd like to see what you can do with a rifle when you're not just fixing it." Sarah's heart started beating faster. "I couldn't. I'm just a contractor. I'm not military." "Some of the best shooters I know aren't military," Marcus replied. "What matters is ability, not uniform." He walked over to the weapons rack and selected a rifle that Sarah had been working on earlier. It was a precision instrument, designed for extreme accuracy at long distances. The scope alone cost more than Sarah made in 2 months. "Tell me about this weapon," Marcus said, handing it to her. Sarah accepted the rifle and immediately felt its perfect balance. "It's a Remington 700 with a custom barrel, Schmidt and Bender scope, probably adjusted for a 175-grain match bullet. Bipod is solid, and the trigger feels like it breaks around 3 pounds." She shouldered the weapon and peered through the scope. "Whoever set this up knew what they were doing." Marcus smiled. Most Marines could tell him the basic specs of their weapons, but Sarah had just given him a complete assessment based on feel alone. She understood the relationship between all the components, how they work together to create accuracy. "There's a target at 400 yards, he said. "Think you can hit it?" Sarah looked downrange. 400 yards was a serious distance, especially with a weapon she had never fired before. But something in Marcus's expression told her this was important, maybe more important than she understood. "I can try," she said quietly. Marcus helped her get into a stable, prone position. He watched as she naturally fell into the fundamentals of precision shooting, things that took most people months to learn properly. Her breathing was controlled, her trigger finger placement was perfect, and she seemed to instinctively understand how to use the bipod for maximum stability. Sarah peered through the scope and found the target. It looked impossibly small at 400 yards. She took a deep breath, let half of it out, and began to slowly squeeze the trigger. The rifle fired with a sharp crack that echoed across the range. Through the spotting scope, Marcus watched the bullet impact exactly where Sarah had been aiming. Dead center. "That was luck," Sarah said, but her voice carried more confidence than her words suggested. "Maybe," Marcus replied. "Let's see if you can get lucky 4 more times." Over the next 20 minutes, Sarah fired 4 more shots. Each one hit the target within inches of her first shot. Her grouping was tighter than what most of his SEAL teammates could achieve on their first try with an unfamiliar weapon. When she finished shooting, Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he spoke. "Sarah, I want to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. He looked directly into her eyes. "What do you really want to do with your life?" The question caught Sarah off guard. Nobody had asked her that in years. She had gotten so used to just getting by, just doing her job, that she had stopped thinking about bigger possibilities. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "I guess I never thought I had many options." Marcus nodded. "I think you have more options than you realize, but they're going to require you to believe in yourself the way I'm starting to believe in you." He began walking back toward the range building, then stopped and turned around. "My team has some exercises coming up that could use someone with your skills. Not as a range tech, but as a shooter. It would mean stepping outside your comfort zone. Way outside." He paused. "You interested in finding out what you're really capable of?" Sarah looked down at the rifle in her hands. Then back at the targets 400 yards away, where her shots had clustered in a group smaller than her fist. For 3 years she had been invisible, just another person doing a support job. But Marcus saw something different when he looked at her. "Yes," she said, and was surprised by the strength in her own voice. "I think I am." Marcus smiled, and for the first time since her father had taught her to shoot, Sarah felt like someone understood what she might be capable of becoming. She didn't know it yet, but this conversation would change everything about her life. The range tech was about to discover that she had the potential to be something extraordinary. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the range 30 minutes earlier than usual. She had barely slept, replaying the conversation with Marcus over and over in her mind. Part of her wondered if she had imagined the whole thing, if a Navy SEAL had really seen potential in a range technician from Texas. Marcus was already there when she arrived, along with 3 other men who carried themselves with the same quiet confidence. These were his teammates, and Sarah could tell immediately that they belonged to a different world than the Marines she usually worked with. "Gentlemen, this is Sarah Martinez," Marcus said as she approached. "Sarah, meet my team, Rodriguez, Thompson, and Hayes." The men nodded respectfully, but Sarah could see the questions in their eyes. What was a civilian contractor doing meeting with a SEAL team at dawn? "Sarah's going to be working with us on some of our long-range scenarios," Marcus explained. "She's got skills that could be useful for what we're doing." Rodriguez, who seemed to be the senior enlisted man on the team, raised an eyebrow. "No offense, miss, but what kind of skills are we talking about?" Instead of answering, Marcus handed Sarah the same rifle she had used the day before. "Show them what you showed me yesterday." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she accepted the weapon. Yesterday had been just her and Marcus. Now she had an audience of elite soldiers who probably wondered what she was doing there. But as soon as she shouldered the rifle, her nervousness faded. The weapon felt familiar now, like an old friend. She settled into her shooting position and acquired the 400-yard target through the scope. The morning air was perfectly still, which would make this shot easier than yesterday. She controlled her breathing, found her natural point of aim, and fired. Through the spotting scope, Rodriguez watched the bullet impact dead center on the target. "Okay," he said quietly. "That got my attention." "Again," Marcus said. Sarah fired 4 more times, each shot landing within a 2-inch group. When she finished, the SEAL team was looking at her with new respect. "Where did you train?" Thompson asked. "My dad's ranch in Texas," Sarah replied. "Started when I was 12. Hayes laughed. "I've been shooting for 20 years, and I'm not sure I could match that group cold bore." Marcus had been watching his teammates' reactions carefully. These men had worked with some of the best marksmen in the military, and they recognized talent when they saw it. More importantly, they understood that natural ability like Sarah's was rare. "Here's what I'm thinking," Marcus said, addressing the whole group. "We've got 2 weeks of advanced scenarios planned. Long-range work, some of it at distances most people can't even see clearly. Sarah might be able to help us push the envelope on what's possible." Rodriguez looked thoughtful. "What kind of clearance does she have?" "We'll work within appropriate boundaries," Marcus replied, "but I think we can give her some opportunities that might benefit everyone." Over the next few days, Sarah found herself drawn into a world she had never imagined. The SEAL team was working on scenarios that challenged every aspect of marksmanship. They practiced shooting at extreme distances, in difficult weather conditions and from unconventional positions. Sarah watched and learned, absorbing techniques that weren't taught in any civilian shooting school. Marcus began including her in their planning sessions. The team would study aerial photographs of their practice areas, calculating distances, wind patterns, and potential shooting positions. Sarah discovered that she had an intuitive understanding of ballistics that impressed even these experienced operators. "Look at this," she said during one planning session, pointing to a ridgeline on the map. "If you position here instead of here, you get a better angle on the target area, plus the terrain gives you natural wind protection." Rodriguez studied the map more carefully. "She's right. I hadn't thought about the wind shadow from that ridge." As the week progressed, Marcus began giving Sarah more challenging assignments. He set up scenarios where she had to make shots at distances she had never attempted before. 600 yards. 700. Each time, Sarah rose to the challenge, adapting her technique and developing skills that normally took years to master. But it wasn't just her shooting that impressed the SEAL team. Sarah had a natural tactical mind. She could look at a landscape and instinctively understand the best positions for observation and engagement. She thought about fields of fire, escape routes, and how weather conditions would affect visibility and ballistics. "You know," Hayes said one afternoon as they finished a particularly challenging exercise, "you think like an operator." Sarah wasn't sure what that meant, but she could tell it was a compliment coming from a Navy SEAL. On Friday of the first week, Marcus approached her with a proposition that would test everything she had learned. "We're doing a major exercise next week," he explained. "Multi-day scenario with multiple teams participating. Long-range reconnaissance and precision fires." He paused. "I want you to be part of it." Sarah felt her heart racing. "I'm not qualified for something like that. I'm just a contractor." "You're not just anything," Marcus replied firmly. "You're one of the most naturally gifted marksmen I've ever worked with. And more importantly, you have the right mindset for this kind of work." He explained the exercise in more detail. Teams would be deployed across a large training area, conducting missions that required extreme precision and patience. Some shots would be at distances approaching 1,000 yards. The scenarios would test not just shooting skills, but also fieldcraft, observation, and decision-making under pressure. "I can't promise it will be easy," Marcus warned. "You'll be working at the edge of your capabilities, maybe beyond, but I think you're ready for it." Sarah thought about everything that had happened over the past week. A few days ago, she had been just another range technician. Now, a Navy SEAL was asking her to participate in advanced military exercises. It was overwhelming and exciting and terrifying all at once. "What if I fail?" she asked. Marcus smiled. "Then you fail forward. Every operator I know has failed at something. What matters is how you respond to it." That weekend, Sarah spent hours researching advanced shooting techniques online. She studied ballistics calculations, wind reading, and long-range shooting fundamentals. But more than the technical knowledge, she thought about what Marcus had said about having the right mindset. She was beginning to understand that precision shooting wasn't just about mechanical skill. It required a particular kind of mental discipline, an ability to remain calm and focused under pressure. Monday morning arrived with overcast skies and a steady wind that would challenge even experienced shooters. Sarah met the SEAL team at a different location, a remote training area that stretched for miles across desert terrain. Other teams were arriving as well, including some Marine Scout snipers and Army Rangers. Sarah suddenly felt very out of place among all these uniformed professionals. "Ignore the uniforms," Marcus advised, reading her expression. "Focus on the mission." The exercise began with a briefing that laid out the scenario. Teams would be assigned targets at various distances and would need to observe, calculate, and engage with precision fires. Points would be awarded not just for accuracy, but for speed, professionalism, and tactical soundness. Sarah found herself paired with Rodriguez for the first scenario. Their target was a series of steel plates positioned at ranges from 600 to 900 yards. The wind was gusting unpredictably, and the overcast sky made range estimation more difficult. "What do you think?" Rodriguez asked, studying the target area through binoculars. Sarah spent several minutes observing the terrain. She watched the grass for wind patterns, estimated distances using techniques Marcus had taught her, and calculated the trajectory needed for each target. "The 600-yard target is straightforward," she said. "But the 900-yard shot is tricky. The wind is swirling through that valley, and there's a thermal updraft from the south-facing slope." Rodriguez lowered his binoculars and looked at her with surprise. "That's exactly what I was thinking. Most people wouldn't notice the thermal effect." They worked together for the next hour, with Rodriguez spotting and Sarah shooting. Her first shot at 600 yards was a direct hit. The 700-yard target required one adjustment for wind, but her second shot found its mark. The 900-yard target was the real test. Sarah studied the conditions carefully before taking the shot. The wind had shifted twice in the past 5 minutes, and she could see heat shimmer rising from the distant rocks. She made her calculations, adjusted her scope, and settled into her shooting position. The shot felt good when it broke, but at 900 yards, there's always uncertainty until you see the impact. Through the spotting scope, Rodriguez watched the bullet strike the target dead center. "Outstanding," he said quietly. "That was a hell of a shot." As the day progressed, Sarah's confidence grew. She successfully engaged targets at distances she had never attempted before. More importantly, she was thinking like a sniper, considering all the factors that affected long-range precision. Wind, temperature, altitude, target movement, concealment, and escape routes all became part of her mental checklist. Other teams began to take notice. Word spread that the SEAL team had a civilian shooter who was performing at an exceptional level. During breaks, experienced snipers would come over to watch Sarah shoot, trying to understand how someone with no formal military training could perform so well. "It's not just her shooting," Rodriguez explained to one curious Marine. "She understands the whole picture. Tactics, fieldcraft, ballistics. It's like she was born for this." On the final day of the exercise, Sarah faced her greatest challenge yet. The scenario called for a precision shot at over 1,000 yards, the longest distance she had ever attempted. The target was barely visible even through the high-power scope, and the wind conditions were constantly changing. Marcus was spotting for her this time, and Sarah could feel the weight of everything she had learned over the past 2 weeks. This shot would determine whether she truly belonged in this world of elite marksmen, or if she had just been lucky. "Take your time," Marcus said calmly. "Trust your training and your instincts." Sarah studied the target through her scope for long minutes, watching the wind, calculating the trajectory, and preparing herself mentally for the shot. When she finally squeezed the trigger, she knew immediately that it was good. The bullet took nearly 2 seconds to reach the target, and in that time, Sarah held her breath. When the impact came, right on target, the small group of observers let out a collective cheer. Marcus lowered his spotting scope and looked at Sarah with something approaching awe. "That," he said, "was the shot of a lifetime." As they packed up their equipment at the end of the exercise, Sarah realized that everything about her life had changed. She was no longer just a range technician. She had proven herself capable of performing at the highest levels of precision marksmanship, competing successfully against some of the military's best shooters. But more than that, she had discovered a passion and purpose that she hadn't known existed. For the first time in years, Sarah felt like she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do. 3 months after the exercise, Sarah's life had changed in ways she never could have imagined. Word of her performance had spread through the military community, and opportunities began appearing that she had never dared to dream about. The first call came from a Marine colonel at Quantico who had heard about the civilian contractor who could outshoot most of his scout snipers. Then a representative from a major defense contractor reached out, asking if she would be interested in consulting on long-range weapons systems. But the call that really mattered came from Marcus. "Sarah, I want to talk to you about something important," he said one morning as they met at their usual spot on the range. "How would you feel about making this official?" Sarah wasn't sure what he meant by official, but the serious tone in his voice told her this was significant. "There's a position opening up with the Naval Special Warfare Development Group," Marcus explained. "Civilian contractor position, but working directly with special operations units. They need someone who understands precision marksmanship at the highest level, someone who can help develop new techniques and train operators." Sarah felt her breath catch. The Naval Special Warfare Development Group was one of the military's most elite units. The idea that they would want someone like her seemed impossible. "Marcus, I appreciate everything you've done for me, but I'm not qualified for something like that. These are the best operators in the world. What could I possibly teach them?" Marcus smiled. 3 months ago, you thought you were just a range technician. Look how wrong you were about that." He became more serious. "Sarah, you have a gift that can't be taught. You see things that other people miss. You understand the science and art of precision shooting in a way that's rare, even among professionals." He pulled out a folder and handed it to her. "These are the results from the exercise we did. Not just your shooting scores, but the evaluations from every team leader who worked with you." Sarah opened the folder and began reading. The comments were unlike anything she had ever seen about herself. Natural tactical instincts. Exceptional ability to read environmental conditions. Calm under pressure. Innovative problem solver. Born marksman. One comment from a Marine Scout sniper instructor particularly stood out. "In 20 years of training snipers, I have rarely seen anyone with Martinez's combination of natural ability and tactical understanding. She would be an asset to any precision shooting program." "I don't understand," Sarah said quietly. "How did this happen so fast?" "Talent like yours doesn't stay hidden for long," Marcus replied. "The military is always looking for people who can push the boundaries of what's possible. You've proven you can do that." Over the next few weeks, Sarah went through a series of interviews and assessments. She met with senior officers who questioned her about ballistics, tactics, and her understanding of precision shooting principles. Each interview went better than she had expected. These experienced professionals seemed genuinely impressed with her knowledge and insights. The formal job offer came on a Friday afternoon. Sarah would become a senior marksmanship instructor and consultant, working with special operations units to develop advanced shooting techniques. The salary was 3 times what she made as a range technician. More importantly, she would be doing work that mattered, training the people who carried out the nation's most critical missions. But accepting the position meant leaving her familiar world behind. No more quiet mornings setting up targets at Camp Pendleton. No more simple routine of maintaining weapons and helping Marines sight their rifles. She would be stepping into a world of high-stakes training and classified operations. Sarah called her father that night to tell him about the opportunity. He listened quietly as she explained everything that had happened since Marcus first noticed her work. "Sweetheart," he said when she finished, "do you remember what I told you when you were 16 and won that shooting competition back home?" Sarah smiled. She remembered exactly. "You said I had a gift, and that gifts are meant to be shared." "That's right. And it sounds like you've found people who recognize that gift and want to help you share it in ways that matter." The decision became clear. Sarah accepted the position and began the most challenging period of her life. Her new role required security clearances, advanced training, and integration into a community where excellence was the minimum standard. But she discovered that everything Marcus had seen in her was real. Her first assignment was to work with a team of Navy SEALs who were preparing for a deployment that would require extreme long-range capabilities. Sarah found herself developing training scenarios that pushed these elite operators beyond what they had previously thought possible. The key isn't just hitting targets at long range, she explained to the team during one training session. It's understanding all the variables that affect your shot, then making decisions quickly enough to matter in a tactical situation. She taught them techniques for reading wind patterns that she had learned growing up on the Texas plains. She showed them how to use terrain features to predict bullet trajectory. Most importantly, she helped them develop the mental discipline required for precision shooting under stress. The SEAL team leader, a veteran operator named Commander Jackson, was initially skeptical about learning from a civilian contractor. But after watching Sarah consistently make shots that challenged even his most experienced snipers, his attitude changed completely. "She thinks about shooting differently than anyone I've worked with," he told Marcus one day. "It's not just technical knowledge. She has an intuitive understanding of how everything connects. The weapon, the environment, the target, the mission. It's like she can see the whole picture at once." Word of Sarah's capabilities continued to spread. She began receiving requests to work with other special operations units, each presenting new challenges that required her to expand her skills and knowledge. She worked with Army Special Forces on high-altitude shooting, with Marine Raiders on urban precision scenarios, and with Air Force Special Operations on mobility and concealment techniques. Each assignment taught her something new, but more importantly, Sarah was contributing to capabilities that could save lives in real-world operations. The techniques she developed and the operators she trained would carry her innovations into missions around the world. 6 months into her new role, Sarah received an invitation that represented the ultimate recognition of how far she had come. She was asked to speak at the International Sniper Competition, sharing her insights with precision marksmen from military and law enforcement organizations around the world. Standing at the podium, looking out at an audience of the world's best shooters, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her here. A year ago, she had been invisible, just another support person doing her job competently but without recognition. Now she was being asked to share her knowledge with people who represented the pinnacle of their profession. "When I started working at Camp Pendleton," she began, "I thought I knew my place in the world. I was a range technician, and that was enough. But sometimes life puts people in your path who see things in you that you don't see in yourself." She told the story of meeting Marcus, of the first time he handed her a rifle and asked her to show what she could do. She talked about the fear and excitement of stepping outside her comfort zone and the discovery that her potential was far greater than she had ever imagined. "The lesson I've learned is that excellence isn't about having the right credentials or wearing the right uniform," Sarah continued. "It's about being willing to push yourself beyond what you think is possible and having people around you who believe in your potential." After her presentation, Sarah was approached by dozens of people who wanted to learn more about her techniques and her story. Among them was a young Marine corporal who reminded Sarah of herself just a year earlier. "Ma'am," the corporal said nervously, "I'm just a basic rifleman, but I've always been interested in precision shooting. Do you think someone like me could ever do what you do?" Sarah smiled, remembering her own uncertainty and self-doubt. "A year ago, I thought I was just a range technician. The most important thing I've learned is that you never know what you're capable of until someone believes in you enough to give you the chance to find out." She handed the corporal her business card. "If you're serious about developing your skills, reach out to me. Everyone deserves someone who will see their potential and help them pursue it." As Sarah flew back to California that evening, she reflected on how completely her life had transformed. She was no longer the invisible contractor who arrived early to set up targets and clean weapons. She had become someone who pushed the boundaries of what was possible in precision marksmanship, someone who trained the military's best operators, someone who was recognized as an expert in her field. But perhaps most importantly, she had learned to see potential in others the way Marcus had seen it in her. She had begun mentoring young shooters, both military and civilian, who showed natural ability but lacked confidence or opportunity. She was paying forward the gift that Marcus had given her when he first handed her a rifle and asked her to show what she could do. Marcus met her at the airport when she returned. As they walked to the parking garage, he asked how the conference had gone. "It was incredible," Sarah replied. "A year ago, I never would have imagined myself speaking to an audience like that, let alone having anything worth saying to them." Marcus nodded. "You know what I realized watching you these past months?" "What's that?" "I didn't create anything new when I noticed your abilities. The talent was already there, had always been there. All I did was give you permission to show yourself what you were capable of." Sarah thought about that as they drove through the California evening. Marcus was right. The skills, the instincts, the tactical understanding, it had all been inside her, waiting for the right moment and the right person to bring it out. Her phone buzzed with a text message from the Marine corporal she had met at the conference. He was asking for advice about training opportunities and wondering if she had any recommendations for improving his long-range shooting skills. Sarah smiled as she typed her response. She was thinking about a young Marine who needed someone to believe in his potential, the same way Marcus had believed in hers. The cycle was continuing, and Sarah was now the one in position to see gifts that others might miss. "I'd be happy to help," she wrote back. "Everyone deserves someone who will see what they're capable of becoming." Looking out the window at the lights of San Diego, Sarah realized that her story was no longer about being a range technician who got noticed by a SEAL. It was about becoming someone who could recognize and nurture potential in others, someone who could help people discover capabilities they never knew they possessed. The range tech had become something she never expected, not just an expert marksman, but a leader who understood that the most important shot you can take is the one that helps someone else discover their own ability to excel. Marcus had handed her more than just a rifle that first day. He had given her a new way of seeing herself and her place in the world. And now it was her turn to do the same for others.